Glass shatters. A wine goblet slips from someone's hand at the far end of the ballroom, not from drink, but because they have just seen her step through the doorway. 300 people. All of them falling silent at once. 3 days ago, 2 words drifted through the gap in a wooden door. "She'll do," a low, unhurried man's voice. The voice of someone who had already decided how the conversation would end before he walked into the room. Then her father's exhale, like a drowning man thrown something to hold on to. Hold on to what? 3 women walked into that house of stone. All 3 vanished before sunrise. No one says what they saw on the first night. At the far end of the hall, a man in black stands apart from the crowd, eyes the color of deep winter water. He is watching her, and on his finger, a ring set with a black stone that swallows the candlelight and gives nothing back. She walks toward him. She does not hesitate. The rumors started the way they always did in London, not with a shout, not with an accusation, with a whisper at the edge of a ballroom, passed from one powdered shoulder to the next, dressed up in concern, delivered with a smile that didn't reach the eyes. The Marsh girl is here, in that dress. She know what happened to the others? She knew. That was the thing none of them understood. Eleanor Marsh. 23 years old, second daughter of Viscount Marsh of Wiltshire, standing in the entrance of Aldermere House, in borrowed ivory silk, that was 2 full seasons behind fashion. She knew exactly what she was walking into. She had heard it through a door. 3 days earlier, the study in her father's townhouse. Late afternoon, the kind of gray London light that made everything look older and more tired than it actually was. Eleanor had been walking past, had heard voices, had stopped. Not because she was the kind of woman who listened at doors, because she heard her own name, the Marsh girl, a voice she didn't recognize. Low, unhurried, the voice of a man who had never needed to raise it to get what he wanted. The voice of someone who had already decided how the conversation would end before he walked into the room. The second daughter, her father, strained, eager. That particular tone she had learned to dread. The one that sounded like relief and desperation living in the same breath. Like a man who had been holding something very heavy for a very long time and had just been offered somewhere to set it down. The second daughter, the other voice confirmed. "She'll do, she'll do." 2 words. Eleanor pressed her palm flat against the wall, steadied herself, kept breathing. Because the breathing was the important part. The breathing was the thing that kept everything else from collapsing inward. The settlements, her father started, will be generous. The debt cleared in full upon signing, plus a sum in cash, immediately available. A pause. The sound of a man who had been drowning for 2 years and had just been thrown something to hold on to. The sound of a decision being made in real time. And if she refuses, then we don't sign. The creditors are notified by the end of the month. You know what happens after that. She did know. They all knew. The Marsh estate in Wiltshire, gone. The house in town, gone. Her younger sister's future, gone. Everything her father had inherited and spent and borrowed against and spent again. All of it balanced on a very thin edge, with a very long drop on the other side. Her father exhaled, the sound of a man who had already made his decision before the conversation started. "She'll be at the Aldermere ball. Friday." Eleanor stepped back from the door, quietly. The way you move when you don't want the sound of your own retreat to tell you something you already know. She stood in the corridor for a long time after that. She was not angry. That surprised her, actually. She had expected anger, had braced for it, but what came instead was something colder and more useful. Clarity. She had one choice. One real one, and she had spent her entire life being practical about difficult things. So she would be practical about this too. She would not perform outrage she couldn't afford. She would not weep into her pillow about the unfairness of a world that had been making this exact transaction for centuries. She would simply decide who she was going to be when she walked into that ballroom. She went upstairs, found her sister, told her nothing, sat with her for an hour talking about nothing important, small things. Safe things. The kind of conversation that existed specifically to fill space while something larger moved underneath. Then she went to her room, and she began. The ballroom of Aldermere House held over 300 of London's finest on a Friday evening. Dukes, earls, viscountesses draped in diamonds and opinions, all of them already talking, already watching, already composing the version of events they would tell at breakfast tomorrow. Because a ballroom was never just a ballroom. It was a stage. and everyone in it understood their role. Eleanor walked through the entrance at 9:30. She did not hesitate. That was the important thing. Not the dress. Not the borrowed silk that pulled slightly at the shoulder where the seam hadn't been let out quite enough. Not the fact that every person within 20 feet turned to look and then, visibly, deliberately, looked outmaneuver to someone else. The hesitation would have finished her before she started. So she didn't hesitate. She walked. At the far end of the hall, Duke of Harrow stood alone near the tall, arched windows, not isolated by distance, isolated by something else, something that existed in the particular way he held himself, upright, still, entirely uninterested in being observed, and yet impossible not to observe. He was tall, dark-haired, dressed in black so precisely cut it looked almost architectural. His jaw was hard. His expression was the specific kind of neutral that men cultivate when they have decided that neutrality is safer than anything real. That feeling nothing visible is the same as being untouchable. His eyes were the color of deep winter water. Not cold exactly. Deeper than cold. The kind of still that existed just before the surface broke. He was already watching her. She had been counting. 4 minutes. From the moment she crossed the threshold to the moment she felt it. His attention, landing on her like weather before it arrives. A shift in the air. A change in pressure. Something that hadn't been there and then suddenly was. She walked toward him, the crowd parted. Not because they were being polite, because they wanted to see. Because 3 women had already walked into Harrow Hall and walked out before sunrise. And here was the 4th one walking toward the man they whispered about, and none of them wanted to miss what happened next. Eleanor kept her eyes forward. Her hands still, her chin level. She stopped at the correct distance. Proper, precise. The distance her mother had drilled into her on the carriage ride over, along with be composed and be agreeable, and the unspoken one that had been written plainly in the trembling of her hands. "Do not let him see your fear, Miss Marsh," he said. His voice was low. Not quiet, low. The kind that didn't need volume to carry weight. Like the sound had decided to settle into the room rather than cross it. "Your Grace," she replied. He studied her. The way a man studies something he hasn't encountered before and isn't sure yet what category to put it in. Looking for the angle, the performance, the version she was presenting versus the version underneath. And finding... what? She couldn't tell yet. She didn't know his face well enough yet. Then, "You're not afraid," not a compliment, an observation. Delivered with the precision of a man who was rarely surprised, and currently was. Just slightly. Just enough to shift something in the way he was looking at her. "I didn't say that," Eleanor answered. Something moved behind his eyes, subtle, swift, gone before it could be named. A recalculation. A revision of whatever he had been expecting her to be. "No," he said quietly. "You didn't." And in those 3 words, in the space between what he'd assumed and what she'd actually said, something was established between them that neither of them had words for yet, not trust. Too early for trust, but the possibility of it. Which was, she was beginning to understand the rarer thing. The ceremony took 11 minutes. That was the thing she kept coming back to afterward. 11 minutes. A church small enough that the solicitor's breathing was audible. Her father at her left, looking like a man who had just signed a document he hadn't fully read. 2 of Calum's men at the back, standing with the practiced stillness of people employed to see everything and say nothing. The vows were spoken. With appropriate gravity, with the correct weight. When he placed the ring on her finger, Eleanor looked at it. A heavy gold band. A single dark stone, catching the candlelight and giving nothing back. Black diamond, Calum said, quietly enough that only she could hear. Traditional. For Harrow brides, she did not ask about the previous ones. She looked up at him instead. He was already looking at her, and in the flat, careful neutrality of his expression, she caught something very brief, very controlled, that looked almost like a man bracing himself. For what, she couldn't say. She didn't know him well enough yet, but she filed it away. Added it to the small collection she was already beginning. By 2 a.m, the carriage rolled through the iron gates of Harrow Hall. Eleanor looked out the window at the house rising against the dark sky. Towers. Stone. Windows lit amber from within. A building that had been standing for 200 years and had developed, over that time, a quality of absolute indifference to the small human dramas that played out inside it. She felt the strange specific sensation of crossing a threshold from which there was no returning, and then she thought, Good. I wasn't planning to go back anyway. She changed into the nightgown her mother had packed. White cotton. Modest. Completely unsuitable for the weight of the evening. Eleanor held it up for a moment and had the brief, slightly hysterical thought. This is what you wear to the most significant night of your life. White cotton. Mother panicked. She chose the chair nearest the fire. Not the bed. The bed felt too presumptuous, too final, too much like a decision she hadn't yet made. She folded her hands in her lap and waited. Her heart was doing something she refused to call panic. It was more like heightened awareness. Her pulse. The fire. The unfamiliar sounds of a house she did not yet know. The way the silence had a different quality here than anywhere else she had ever been. Heavier, older, more accustomed to being the only thing in the room. Calum entered at 2:30. He had removed his formal coat. His sleeves were rolled to the forearms. That detail struck her as unexpectedly human. This man that 3 women had fled before sunrise. Standing in the doorway of the bridal chamber, looking like someone who had been sitting in a room, alone for a long time, and had finally decided to stop sitting. He moved through the room without ceremony. Set a glass of water on the side table. Didn't offer her one. Stood near the window with his back partially turned, the silence stretched. Eleanor had decided in the carriage. She would not be the first to break it. Let him establish the terms. Let him speak first. She would listen. Assess. Respond from a position of information rather than reaction. That was the only advantage she had, and she was going to use it. 30 seconds. 1 minute, when he finally turned. His eyes moved over her with the same precision she had felt across the ballroom. Looking for something. Still looking, not unkindly, not with anything she could call cruelty. Just, methodically, as if she were a problem he was trying to understand before he attempted to solve it. You should understand, he said. What this marriage is. I believe I do, she replied. You believe, he repeated, like the word itself was insufficient. Like belief was a lesser thing than knowing, and he had decided to make that distinction clear. He paused. Started again. Sit down. He stopped, a faint alteration in his expression, almost imperceptible. Something catching itself, Your Grace. A correction. Issued to himself. Like a man remembering that the rules had changed. Eleanor almost smiled, almost. He crossed to the small settee near the fire and sat. Not on the bed, she registered that, filed it away. He braced his forearms on his knees and looked at her with the frank, unflinching directness she was already understanding was not performance. It was simply how he existed in the world. He had stopped performing somewhere a long time ago and never picked it back up. This is a contractual arrangement, he said. I require an heir. I require a duchess who will conduct herself with appropriate dignity in public, who will not interfere with my affairs, and who will not make demands I am unable or unwilling to meet. He paused. In return, your family's debt is cleared. You will have access to every comfort this estate provides. You will be treated with the full respect of your station. Eleanor listened to all of it, let it settle. Then, what happened to the 3 before me? The stillness that followed was different from his previous silences. This one had weight, the kind that came from a question landing somewhere real, rather than glancing off the surface. They left, he said. Of their own accord. Why? He looked at the fire for a moment, then back at her, because I told them the truth about what this marriage was. And they preferred a different version. What version was that? The one that involves devotion. Eleanor considered this. The fire shifted. Outside, wind moved through the old trees on the grounds, a low, unhurried sound. Like the house itself was listening. I don't need devotion, she said. I need you to not lie to me. You've managed that so far. He stared at her. For the first time since she had walked into that ballroom 3 hours ago, Duke of Harrow looked like a man who had prepared for a specific conversation and found himself in a completely different one. You're not what I expected, he said. No, she agreed. I don't imagine I am. She didn't mean to fall asleep. That was important to understand. It was not a statement, not a performance of ease she didn't feel. It was simply the exhaustion and the fear and the strange, specific relief of having survived the first hour of this marriage dissolved together into something her body could no longer hold upright. She had been in the middle of explaining something about the household, about her intentions to understand how Harrow Hall worked before she suggested anything different. Her voice was steady, her hands were folded, her spine was straight, and then, her eyes closed. She didn't feel herself slump. Didn't feel the moment her head dropped toward her shoulder. Didn't feel the fiber warming the room to something that was almost, against all logic and circumstance, comfortable. What she did feel, in that half-waking place between sleep and morning, was warmth settling across her shoulders, a blanket placed with a care so quiet it could almost be missed, the kind of gesture that did not announce itself, the kind that happened when someone thought no one was watching. She did not open her eyes to check. She simply stayed, let herself stay. And in the part of her mind that was still half-conscious, still cataloging, still filing things away for later, she noted it, added it to the collection. Set it beside, he corrected himself when he forgot her title, and he didn't sit on the bed and he told the truth when he didn't have to. Small things. But small things were how you learned a person. Not the speeches, not the gestures they knew you were watching. The things they did when they thought no one was keeping count. Someone was keeping count. Calum Harrow sat beside his wife in the hour before dawn. He did not move, did not leave, watched the fire burn low and listened to the sound of her breathing, even, unhurried, entirely unguarded in a way she never was when she was awake. And tried to understand what he was feeling. It didn't have a name, that was the problem. He had names for most things. He had made it a point, over the course of 34 years, to have names for most things. Names gave you edges, gave you something to hold. Undefined things moved around too much. Undefined things had a way of becoming larger than you intended. This didn't have a name. He looked at the window. The first gray suggestion of dawn beginning to soften the dark at the edges of the glass. He should go. His own rooms, his own chair. The paperwork he had been avoiding for 3 days because he had been distracted. By the approach of a wedding he had arranged with the same detached efficiency he arranged everything, and had not expected to feel anything about. He looked at her. She had argued with him. Not with anger, not with tears. With logic and a kind of calm he recognized uncomfortably as a mirror of his own. The kind of calm that was not the absence of feeling but the very controlled management of it. I don't need devotion. I need you to not lie to me. When was the last time someone had said something that simple to him? He stayed until the fire went out. Then he stood, quietly, and left before she woke. Because leaving was the thing he knew how to do. Staying was the thing he was still, apparently, learning. By morning, the staff knew. Staff always knew. They had not needed to be told. They had needed only to see Eleanor Marsh, Eleanor Harrow, Duchess of Harrow, come down the stairs at 7:30 in a deep green dress that had been laid out by a lady's maid she hadn't yet met, looking composed in the particular way that people look composed when they are also quietly taking inventory of every detail around them. The word passed without a single syllable being spoken aloud. She's still here. Mrs. Aldwych met her at the foot of the staircase, 55 years old. 20 years in service to Harrow Hall. The kind of woman who had survived 3 near duchesses by knowing precisely when to offer warmth and when to offer distance, and who could read the temperature of a situation from 20 feet away before a word had been exchanged. She curtsied. Your Grace, I trust your rooms were comfortable. Very, Eleanor said. I'd like to speak with you about the household schedule at your earliest convenience. I prefer to understand how things work before I suggest how they might work differently. Mrs. Aldwych blinked once, then smiled. Small, genuine. The smile of a woman who had been waiting, without knowing she was waiting, for someone to say exactly that. For someone to ask rather than assume. For someone to treat the 20 years she had spent learning this house as information worth having. After breakfast, Your Grace? After breakfast, the news reached London by noon. Not the quiet truth of it. A woman who had fallen asleep in a chair and woken with a blanket over her shoulders and a duke who was nowhere to be found. But the shape of it. The essential fact that the whispers had been waiting to determine. She survived, in certain drawing rooms, among certain women who had watched the previous 3 walk out of Harrow Hall undone. It landed with the weight of something significant. A thing that had seemed impossible had decided not to be. In one particular drawing room, it landed differently, Lady Cordelia Strayle. 26 years old, set down her teacup with a sound that was precisely too controlled to be casual. How extraordinary, she said softly. Her companion, a viscountess who had learned years ago that the wisest thing to do in Cordelia's presence was to nod and say very little, said nothing. Cordelia looked out the window at the grey London morning. She had known Calum Harrow for 6 years, had stood in certain rooms with him during certain evenings, that she had, perhaps, allowed herself to interpret with more permanence than he had ever offered, had watched every other woman fail to hold his attention long enough to reach the altar, until now. "Who is she?" Cordelia asked. "Marsh girl, second daughter of Viscount Marsh." Her companion hesitated. "Nobody particularly remarkable, they say. Intelligent, perhaps." Cordelia was quiet for a moment. "Intelligent," she repeated, turning the word over. Deciding what to do with it, she reached for her tea. She would need to think about this carefully. 3 days after the wedding, Lord Ivor Dunn arrived at Harrow Hall, no prior notice. Just a horse in the courtyard and the particular brand of self-assurance that came from a man who had known the Duke since they were 19 and had never developed the habit of announcing himself. He was everything Calum was not in terms of surface presentation. Animated where Calum was still. Openly amused where Calum was carefully neutral. The kind of man who said what he was thinking approximately 3 seconds after he thought it. A quality that made him either very useful or very dangerous, depending entirely on the occasion. Calum was not home. He had ridden out to the eastern boundary at dawn. A habit, Mrs. Aldwych informed Eleanor, that predated the marriage and showed no signs of changing. Eleanor received Lord Ivor in the blue drawing room, because he was a peer and propriety required it, and because she had spent 3 days learning the geography of this house and had decided it was time to stop moving through it like a guest. "You're not what I expected," Ivor said. She looked at him. "That's the second time someone has said that to me this week." He laughed, genuine, surprised. "I meant it as a compliment." Calum's previous options tended toward the ornamental. "I'll try not to find that insulting." "Don't. It's the best thing I could have said." He settled into the chair across from her with the ease of someone who had sat in this room 100 times before. Accepted his tea, looked at her with an open, uncomplicated curiosity. "How is he?" Ivor asked, casually. But not entirely casually, Fdunknell Eleanor said. "That's actually better than I expected. Is it that low a bar?" "You'd be surprised." She noticed about 20 minutes into the conversation the sound of a horse in the courtyard that had not been there a moment ago, and then the particular quality of silence that preceded Calum entering a room. He came through the door still in his riding coat, dust on his boots. An expression of complete controlled neutrality that she had already learned was not actually neutrality at all. He scanned the room in a single sweep. Ivor, Eleanor, the tea service, the angle of their chairs, the distance between them. Everything assessed, everything filed. "Ivor," he said. "Level Calum." Ivor rose. "I came to meet your Duchess. You've been keeping her rather hidden." "She hasn't been hidden. She's been busy. You should know," Ivor said cheerfully, "that your wife has just spent 20 minutes demonstrating more practical understanding of this estate than you've shown in 3 years of ownership." "Lord Ivor was just leaving," Eleanor said. Ivor raised his eyebrows. "Was he?" "Yes," she said. "He was." He laughed, made his farewells, shook Calum's hand and said something quiet, something that made Calum's expression do something complicated and brief. And then he was gone. The door closed. Calum looked at her. She looked back. "You came back early," she said. "I own the estate," he said, which was not an answer. "You do," she agreed, and left it there. On the morning of the 4th day, Eleanor found the contract. She had asked her father's solicitor, a thin, nervous man who arrived with a leather case and the expression of someone who deeply wished he were somewhere else, for a complete copy of all signed documents. "Standard practice," she told him. "I like to understand what I've signed." He handed over the file, left quickly. Had the air of a man who had done something he was going to spend several nights thinking about. Eleanor sat at the small writing desk in her sitting room and read everything. 3 pages. Standard language. The terms Calum had outlined on their wedding night, the debt, the settlements, the expectations, and then a 4th page, a single sheet, her father's signature at the bottom. The date matching the day of the original signing. She read it twice, put it down, picked it up. Read it a 3rd time to make absolutely certain she understood what she was looking at. The language was careful. The kind of careful that came from someone who knew exactly how far you could push legal phrasing before it became obviously fraudulent. The essential meaning was this: if the marriage dissolved within the first 12 months, for any reason pertaining to the moral conduct or misrepresentation of the character of the wife, the full sum paid to clear the Marsh family's debts would become immediately due and payable, with interest, which meant, if Eleanor was pushed out of this marriage by a scandal, by a rumor, by anything that could be characterized as her fault, her family lost everything, more than everything. This was not a contract that protected her family. This was a trap. And the man who had written this clause, the man whose careful legal hand she recognized even without a name on the page, had not been her father. Her father couldn't write a contract that clever. He had signed it. But he had not written it. Someone else had. Someone who had anticipated from the beginning that Eleanor might need to be removed. She sat with that for a long time. The fire crackled. The ordinary sounds of a large house continued around her, indifferent to the small earthquake happening in the upstairs sitting room. She thought about the voice she had heard through the door. She'll do. Not her father's voice. The other one. Low, unhurried. The voice of a man who already knew how the story would end. She folded the fourth page, separate from the others, placed it in the locked drawer of the writing desk. Then she went downstairs. Because she was not going to be afraid of this. She was going to understand it. That evening, Lord Ivor had not left London. He was waiting in Calum's private study, the one with the locked door that Calum had apparently forgotten to lock, which Ivor had interpreted as an invitation. She found the fourth page, Ivor said, without preamble, when Calum entered. Calum stopped. You don't know that. I know the look on the face of a woman who has just understood something she didn't expect to understand. I've been married for 9 years. I know that look. Calum moved to the desk. Sat. Said nothing. Pemmer, Ivor said. Not a question, Pemmer, Calum confirmed. He wrote the fourth page. Ivor was quiet for a moment. Then, with the measured tone of a man keeping something very large, very controlled. You knew when you signed it. I knew when I signed it. Calum, I didn't have a choice. You know what happens if I don't have a legitimate heir secured by my 35th birthday. The entire estate passes into the trust. And you know who controls the trust. Pemmer. Pemmer, the fire in the study popped. A log settling. The sound of something giving way under pressure it had been holding too long. So you married a woman, Ivor said slowly, knowing there was a clause specifically designed to allow her to be destroyed. Knowing the man who wrote that clause would use it, I thought I had time to... To what? Fix it? Ivor leaned forward. She's 23 years old, Calum. She walked into that ballroom in a borrowed dress and a spine that most men in this city would trade their titles for. She didn't trust me. She made a practical decision. She trusted the information you gave her. Ivor's voice was very level now, which was not complete. The silence stretched. Calum said nothing. Because there was nothing to say. He had known. He had made a calculation. The kind his father had taught him to make. The kind that prioritized outcome over cost and treated other people as variables in an equation. He had told himself it was necessary. Had told himself he would find a way to neutralize the fourth page before Pemmer could use it. Had told himself a lot of things. What do you know about Pemmer? Eleanor's voice came from the doorway. Both men turned. She stood in the entrance, composed, a book in one hand. She had been on her way to the library, had passed the study door, had heard the name, Your Grace. Calum began, Aldous Pemmer. He was the other voice in the room when my father signed the contract. Not a question. A statement. He arranged this marriage. A beat. What do you know about him? Calum looked at her. She looked back, and in the particular quality of that exchange, her standing in the doorway, him behind his desk, 3 days of marriage between them, and a very large, very specific secret sitting in the middle of it. He made a decision. Not a calculation. A decision, the difference mattered. Come in, he said, and close the door. She came in, she closed the door. She did not sit down. Aldous Pemmer is a creditor, Calum said, the significant one. The man who holds the largest portion of your family's debt. And more relevantly, the man who controls the trust that holds my inheritance if I fail to marry before my 35th birthday, which is in 9 weeks, which was in 9 weeks. At the time of the signing, now 6, she said. Now 6, she processed this. The brief, rapid movement behind her eyes as she reorganized information fitted new pieces into the structure she had already built. He wrote the fourth page, she said. Yes, you knew, yes. She was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was absolutely even. Why are you telling me now? Because you already know. And because, he stopped. Started again. Because I was wrong to sign it without telling you. That was a choice I made that I would not make again. Ivor, very quietly, picked up his hat. "I'll see myself out," he said to no one in particular. Neither of them looked at him. The door closed. "He's going to use it," Eleanor said. "Almost certainly. Not against me directly. He'll find something. A rumor. A letter. Something he can present to the family council that looks like my misconduct. Yes. How long do we have? Weeks. Perhaps less." She nodded once. "Filed information. Assessed. Then we'd better be ready," she said. She crossed to the door. Paused. "One more question. Yes, the blanket. Last night, a beat the room was cold," he said. "Yes," she said. "It was." She left. Calum sat alone in the study for a long time after that. The fire burned low. The house settled around him with its familiar sounds. Old stone, old wood, the language of a building that had been standing long enough to develop opinions. He thought about a woman who had heard her own name through a door and walked into a ballroom anyway. Who had said, "I don't need devotion. I need you to not lie to me." Who had found a legal trap he had not told her about and come to his study not to accuse him, not to fall apart, but to ask a single direct question. He's going to use it. How long do we have? In 34 years, Calum Harrow had made a thorough practice of not needing anyone. He was beginning to suspect that was going to be considerably more difficult to maintain. He went to bed, for the first time in longer than he could account for. He did not want the house to be empty. 2 weeks into the marriage, Eleanor learned something about Calum Harrow that no one had bothered to write down. He was awake before 4, every morning, without exception. Not restless, not visibly troubled, simply awake. Like sleep was something he tolerated in limited quantities, and then dismissed when it had served its purpose. Like rest was a concession he made to his body rather than something he allowed himself to want. She knew because she was awake too. Not every morning, but enough. Enough to notice the particular quality of silence that meant he was moving through the house below her. The soft sound of his study door. The faint smell of wood smoke that came up through the floors when he lit the fire himself rather than calling for a footman. A man who had grown up with 40 servants and still lit his own fire at 4 in the morning. She filed that away. Added it to the collection. The collection was growing. The breakfast room became neutral territory, not by agreement, not by design. By the simple logic of 2 people who both woke early in a house with 1 warm room and no particular reason to pretend they hadn't noticed each other. The first morning it happened, neither of them said anything about it. Calum was already at the table when she came down, reading, a cup at his elbow. He looked up when she entered, looked back down at his papers, said nothing. Eleanor poured her tea, sat at the far end of the table, read her own correspondence. They remained like this for approximately 40 minutes. No conversation, no performance of sociability. Just 2 people occupying the same room with the quiet ease of people who had separately discovered that silence was more honest than small talk. She went upstairs. He didn't look up. The second morning, there were 2 cups already on the table when she arrived. Her preference, strong, no sugar, which she had mentioned once, in passing, to Mrs. Aldwych 3 days ago. He was reading. Did not acknowledge the cups. She sat down. Did not acknowledge them either. They read in silence for 50 minutes. It was, she thought, quietly, privately, in the part of her that kept track of things she wasn't ready to say out loud. The most comfortable she had been in a room with another person in longer than she could account for, because he wasn't performing ease, and neither was she. And there was something she didn't have a word for yet. In being in a room with someone who had also decided to stop pretending, Mrs. Aldwych found Eleanor in the east corridor on the 8th morning, measuring windows. Not metaphorically. Literally measuring windows, with a length of string and a small notebook. Because 3 of the east corridor windows had frames warped by damp for going on 2 winters, and no one had replaced the seals, and Eleanor found this, practically, aesthetically, personally, unacceptable. "Your Grace," Mrs. Aldwych said with the tone of a woman who had been waiting for an excuse to have a real conversation. "May I ask what you're doing?" "Measuring windows. I can see that the frames are rotting. I'd like to have them replaced before the cold sets in properly." Mrs. Aldwych was quiet for a moment. "I submitted a request for those repairs in February," she said. And the February before that, Eleanor looked at her. What happened to the requests? They went to the estate manager, who referred them to His Grace's solicitor, who filed them for review. And they're still filed for review. Eleanor wrote something in her notebook. Who is the estate manager? His Grace appointed him 2 years ago. A man named Griggs Sr. Who recommended him? A pause. Brief. Careful. Lord Pemmer suggested the appointment, I believe. Eleanor stopped writing. She looked at the warped window frame, at the dark water staining along the lower edge, at 2 years of small, accumulating damage that no one had fixed because the man managing the requests was appointed by the man who had written the 4th page. She thought. Deliberate. Slow. Like someone had been letting the house decay on purpose. Like someone had been quietly, methodically creating a problem large enough to eventually justify intervention, to eventually justify outside funding, outside control. She wrote 3 more words in her notebook. Closed it. Mrs. Aldwych, she said, how long have you worked here? 20 years, Your Grace. In that time, what do you think has needed the most attention? Not the windows. This house, this estate. What's been waiting? Mrs. Aldwych looked at her. Not the careful, measured look of a servant assessing a question. The real look. The look of a woman who had been in this building for 20 years. Watching things go unattended and had stopped being asked for her opinion so long ago that being asked now required a moment of adjustment. Everything, she said quietly. Everything has been waiting. That evening, Eleanor sat across from Calum in the library after dinner. The first time she had come uninvited. A threshold she acknowledged privately, she set her notebook on the table between them. Griggs Sr., she said. Your current estate manager? When did you appoint him? 2 years ago, on whose recommendation? A beat. Pemmer mentioned him. He's been filing repair requests without acting on them. Specifically for the East Corridor, the North Boundary Bridge, and the tenant farmhouses in the lower quarter. Mrs. Aldwych has submitted the same requests repeatedly for 2 years. Calum was still. If those structures deteriorate past a certain point, Eleanor continued, the cost of repair becomes significant enough to justify external intervention, which would require outside funding, which creates leverage. She let that sit. He's been doing it slowly, she said. Slowly enough not to notice if you're not looking for it. Calum picked up the notebook. Read through it. His jaw tightened once, very briefly. You found this in 2 weeks, he said. I was looking, I wasn't. Not self-reproach, just a fact. The flat, clear recognition of a man who had just understood that he had been too focused on the wall in front of him to see what was coming from the side. He's patient, Eleanor said, and he's been doing this for years. That means he expected to have time. Which means he didn't expect us. She paused. Or he didn't expect me. I'll have Griggs removed by morning, Calum said. Don't, Eleanor said. Not yet. If we remove him now, Pemmer knows we've found the thread. We need to follow it further before we pull. A beat. You've done this before, Calum said. Done what? Strategized. Like this, under pressure. I grew up in a house that was falling apart while everyone pretended it wasn't, she said. You learn to look at things directly. He was quiet for a moment. Then, with the careful deliberation of a man who had decided to say something he hadn't planned to say. My father did the same thing. Pretended Eleanor looked at him. Not about the estate. About everything else. She waited. He didn't continue, but he didn't look away either. And the fact that he had said that much, in that room, to her, was not a small thing. She understood that. Tell me about him, she said. Not tonight, he said. All right. She closed her notebook. They sat for another hour. Reading, mostly, the fire between them, neither of them pretending they were there for the books. The letter from Cordelia arrived on a Thursday. No name on the outside, just an initial, C, in the handwriting of someone who had been taught penmanship by a very exacting governess and had since decided to use that skill as a form of controlled pressure. Eleanor found it on the morning post tray. Broke the seal, read it standing in the entrance hall in the pale morning light. She read it twice, not because it was unclear. Because she wanted to understand not just what it said, but what it was trying to accomplish. Cordelia's letter was not threatening. That was what made it interesting. It was explanatory, almost reasonable. The careful tone of a woman who believed she was delivering facts rather than detonating something. Your Grace, I write not from malice, but from a sense of honesty I believe you deserve. I have known the Duke of Harrow for 6 years. During that time, we shared an understanding. Unspoken, yes, and never formally arranged, but present in the way some things are present between people who have spent enough time together in enough particular moments. I did not misread this. I know the difference between what I imagined and what was real. He did not tell me he was marrying. He did not explain his decision. He signed a contract, and I received the news through a third party. I am not asking you to leave. I am simply telling you what was, so that you understand the situation you have entered. There are people who feel they have a claim on what you now hold. See, Eleanor folded the letter, placed it in her pocket. She went upstairs and sat at the writing desk for a long time. Not because the letter frightened her, because, underneath the careful phrasing, underneath the performance of calm, she could hear something in Cordelia's words that was not strategic. It was genuine, 6 years, unspoken, never formally arranged. The particular agony of a woman who had been given enough to hope and not enough to hold. He did not tell me Eleanor thought about a man who lit his own fire at 4 a.m, who had signed a contract with a trap in it and told himself he would fix it before it mattered. A man who had never learned to tell people things, not because he was cruel, because he had been taught, very thoroughly, over a very long time, that what he felt and what he owed and what he wanted were 3 entirely separate categories that should never be permitted to touch. She put the letter in her notebook. Then she went to find Calum. He was in the study. Of course he was in the study. Eleanor entered without knocking, put the letter on his desk, stood, waited. He read it, all of it, without expression. His hands still on the page. Then he set it down. She's not wrong, he said. I know. About what there was between us, I gathered I didn't intend for her to hope, Eleanor said, or to assume. He looked at her. Both, and you never clarified. No, because? A long pause. Because clarifying would have required a conversation about what I actually wanted. And I had decided at some point that what I wanted was not a relevant variable. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment. That's a very lonely way to live, she said. He said nothing. She's going to move against me, Eleanor said. This letter isn't the warning. This letter is the test. She's seeing whether I'll panic, whether I'm the kind of woman who can be destabilized by the existence of someone else's feelings. And are you? No. But she doesn't know that yet. She picked the letter back up, put it in her notebook. Is there anything between you now? She asked. Direct, unemotional. No. Was there ever formally? No. Then there's nothing to address legally. She closed the notebook. The problem is not Cordelia. The problem is whoever's helping her. Calum looked up sharply. She didn't write that letter alone, Eleanor said. The legal phrasing in the middle section, that's specific. Someone told her what to say. Pemmer, Calum said. Almost certainly. They looked at each other across the desk. And in that look, not comfortable, not warm, but honest in a way that was becoming its own language, something settled between them that had not been there before, an understanding of the thing they were in together. The shape of it, the edges. We're going to need to be more coordinated. She said, yes, that means you tell me things before they become problems. A beat. I'm not practiced at that. I know, she said. Start anyway. Mrs. Aldwych told her about the father on a Tuesday afternoon, not because she was asked, not directly, because Eleanor had been in the kitchens reviewing the winter provisions, and at some point the conversation had turned to the East Wing, the rooms that had been closed since the previous Duke died. And Mrs. Aldwych had gone quiet. Not the polite quiet of a servant knowing her place, the quiet of a woman who had been holding something for a very long time. Eleanor sent the cook away. Then she sat down at the kitchen table, which was not where duchesses typically sat, and which Mrs. Aldwych registered with a blink and then a careful absence of comment, and said, "Tell me." And Mrs. Aldwych told her the previous Duke of Harrow had not been violent. She said that first, clearly, because she wanted to be precise. He had not raised his voice. He had not broken things. He had been cold systematically, comprehensively. The kind of cold that was worse than anger, because anger at least acknowledged you were worth the energy. He had treated Calum's mother like a well-maintained piece of furniture. Present, functional, replaceable. He had referred to her in the third person when she was in the room. Had made decisions about her schedule, her visitors, her correspondence, her health, without consulting her, without looking at her. She was a warm woman, Mrs. Aldwych said quietly. Naturally warm. The kind that makes a room different when she's in it. He didn't break that. He just made it invisible. For long enough that she stopped showing it. Eleanor said nothing, listened when she died. Master Calum was 14. He came downstairs the morning after, and his father was already at his desk. Working. He told the boy, "I was in the corridor. I heard it." he said. She let herself be weakened by feeling. Don't make the same mistake. And then he went back to his papers. The kitchen was very quiet. The fire, the smell of bread from the morning's baking, the ordinary warmth of a room designed to sustain people surrounding this specific, terrible piece of information. He believed it, Mrs. Aldwych said. That's the worst part. The boy heard it and believed it. Because he was 14 and his mother had just died, and his father was the only person left. And sometimes we believe things not because they're true, but because we need something to hold on to. Eleanor sat with that. Does he know you knew her? That you remember her as she was? I don't think he's ever thought to ask. Has anyone? In 20 years? Mrs. Aldwych looked at her hands. No, Your Grace. You're the first. Eleanor stood, walked to the window, looked out at the grounds, the trees, the path to the east garden, the stone walls of a house that had held all of this, silently, for 200 years. She thought about a man who had decided, at 14, in the worst moment of his life, that feeling things was the same as being destroyed by them, 34 years old. Still holding that. Still carrying the instruction his father had issued over a dead woman's body as though it were wisdom rather than damage. Still lighting his own fire at 4 in the morning rather than calling for anyone. Lord, she thought. No wonder he didn't know what to do with me. She turned back to Mrs. Aldwych. Thank you, she said, for telling me. I thought you should know. Mrs. Aldwych said, simply, I thought someone should. The forged letter arrived on a Friday morning, no return address. The seal was plain wax. The handwriting on the front was elegant in the way of someone who had been educated to write beautifully and had since decided to use that beauty as a form of precision weaponry for the Duchess of Harrow. If she still holds the title by the time this is read. Eleanor stood in the entrance hall and looked at those words for a moment. Then she broke the seal. 2 pages inside. The first was a covering letter. No signature. Just a careful description of how the writer had come to possess the enclosed document and felt, in good conscience, compelled to share it. Eleanor noticed the legal phrasing immediately. Then she turned to the second page, her name at the top, Lord Ivor Dunn's signature at the bottom. And between them, a block of text suggesting, in language just careful enough to avoid being obviously fraudulent, that Eleanor and Ivor had known each other prior to her marriage, that the nature of that acquaintance had been incompatible with her current position, that Lord Ivor intended to maintain the connection regardless of the Duke's claim. Then again, slower. Right, she thought. There it is. She felt a very specific kind of cold anger. Not hot, not panicked. The kind that came from watching someone do something deliberately stupid and knowing you were going to have to clean it up. The letter was technically passable. But the emotional logic was wrong. Ivor Dunn wrote in a direct, slightly abrasive style. This letter was too careful, too formal. It read like someone who had studied a person and then imitated them without understanding how they actually spoke, which meant the person who wrote it had spent time on it, had done the research, but hadn't spent time with Ivor personally. She folded both pages, placed them in the envelope, handed it to her lady's maid. My writing desk. Locked drawer. Yes, Your Grace, says no reply. She went upstairs, sat at the writing desk. Thought the forged letter was the weapon. The covering letter without a signature was the delivery mechanism. And the person who wrote it had been careful enough not to sign, but careless enough to use specific legal phrasing that narrowed the field considerably. She's not running this, Eleanor thought. Cordelia. She's being run. She opened her notebook. She had 3 things she needed. Someone who could testify to the forgery directly, someone who had been in Bath 2 years ago and could account for her time there, and the lawyer who had drafted the 4th page. 3 problems. 3 letters. She uncapped her pen. Calum found her at the writing desk at midnight. He knocked once, entered when she called, looked at the 3 sealed letters on the desk, at the ink still drying on her fingers. It's midnight, he said. I know. What are you writing? She gestured at the letters. First one is to Mrs. Aldwych. I need a complete record of my schedule since I arrived. Every meeting, every visitor, every village visit. Dated. Witnessed where possible, and Lord Ivor. The letter carries his forged signature. I need him to deny it under oath if necessary. He'll do it, I know. But I needed to ask directly rather than assume. And the third? She paused. Lady Constance Vere. 70 years old. She lives at Hartmoor, in Somerset. She took tea every morning with my mother and me for the entirety of a 3-week visit to Bath 2 years ago. The forged letter places me in Ivor's company during that period, which you weren't, which I wasn't. Lady Constance was with me every morning from 8 until 10. She will remember. She remembers everything. She also has been looking for an occasion to address certain people's habits of invention for some time. How do you know that? Because she told my mother, and my mother told me, and I filed it away in case it was ever useful. Calum looked at her for a long moment. The lamp on the desk, the 3 letters, the ink on her fingers. The completely unhurried way she had laid out a 3-point defense for a legal challenge that hadn't been formally filed yet. They haven't submitted the petition, he said. Not yet. You're preparing before they do. I'd rather be ready 2 weeks early than 2 days late, Eleanor. She looked up. Why didn't you come to me first? The question landed between them. Quiet. Real because, she said. I needed to know I could handle this without you. Before I decided how much to handle with you, he absorbed that. And now? He asked. Now I have 3 letters ready to go in the morning. A fourth problem I haven't solved yet, which is the lawyer who drafted the 4th page. He's the key. If I can find him, find records of when that page was actually drafted versus when it was supposedly signed, I can prove the clause is fraudulent, not just suspicious. Fraudulent. Callum sat down in the chair across from the desk. His name is Barwick, he said. He was Pemmer's personal counsel for 11 years. He left Pemmer's employ 8 months ago. They had a disagreement. Do you know where he is now? No, but I can find out. She picked up her pen, added a note to the bottom of her page. This is what I meant, she said. About telling each other things, he looked at her. You knew Barwick's name, she said. That's information I needed. You didn't think to mention it, not because you were hiding it. Because you're still operating like someone who handles things alone. I am someone who handles things alone. You were, she said. You live here now. The fire shifted. A log settling. Calum sat in the chair and did not argue the point. Because there was no good argument against it. Because she was right and he knew it, and the strange part, the part he was having difficulty placing, was that being told he was wrong did not produce the defensive cold it usually produced. It produced something else entirely, something that felt uncomfortably and unmistakably like relief. Get some sleep, he said. Send the letters in the morning. I will. I'll find Barwick. I know you will. He stood, crossed to the door, paused. You've been here 2 weeks, he said. She looked up. And you already know this house better than I do. She held his gaze for a moment. I was paying attention, she said. Something crossed his face then, not quite the smile. Adjacent to it. The thing that lived just before the smile and was, she had come to understand, worth considerably more. He left. She picked up her pen. Add one more note to her page. Find Barwick before Tuesday. Monday arrived. The letters had gone out Friday morning. By Monday, all 3 had received replies. Mrs. Aldwick's response was not a letter. It was a document. 14 pages, handwritten, organized by date, cross-referenced with visitor records and the household ledger, every day since Eleanor's arrival at Harrow Hall, every meeting, every village visit, every hour. It was, and Eleanor said this privately to herself, in a tone that was partly awe and partly recognition, the most competent piece of evidence assembly she had ever seen from someone who had supposedly been given a simple scheduling request. Mrs. Aldwick had known what she was building. She had been waiting for someone to ask. Lord Ivor's response was 2 lines. I have no idea who wrote that letter, but it wasn't me. I'll say so to anyone who asks, under any conditions you require, including oath. Ivor and then a postscript. Also, tell him the North Bridge is a structural hazard. I nearly lost a horse on it last spring. Lady Constance Vere wrote 4 pages, in a handwriting that suggested fury expressed through the finest penmanship available to the English language. The essential content. She remembered every morning of that Bath visit with perfect clarity. She would appear in person at any venue required on any date specified, and she had been waiting for an opportunity to address certain individuals' habits of inventing convenient histories for considerably longer than the current situation warranted. Eleanor set all 3 on Calum's desk without comment on Monday evening. He read them, set them down, looked at her. You did this in 2 days, he said, 3 if you count Sunday. Lady Constance writes at length. Something crossed his face. Not quite amusement, not quite something else. Living exactly between the 2. Barwick, he said. I found him. She looked up. He's in Edinburgh. Left London after his disagreement with Pemmer. He retained copies of all documents he drafted during his employment. A pause. Including the 4th page, he kept them. He kept them, Calum confirmed. I believe he kept them specifically because he expected to need them someday. He'll testify? For the right approach. Not money. He wants something else. Calum paused. He wants it on record, officially, that Pemmer instructed him to backdate a document. He's been carrying that for 8 months, and it's been eating at him. Eleanor thought about this. He has a conscience, she said. An inconveniently timed one, the best kind. She picked up the document from Mrs. Aldwych, set it next to Ivor's letter, next to Lady Constance's 4 pages, 4 pieces, and now Barwick enough. Maybe enough. When does the council meet? She asked. Cordelia submitted the petition today, he said. Tuesday. 1 week. Then we have 7 days. He was standing behind his desk with his hands flat on the surface, and the particular expression she had come to recognize as the one that preceded him saying something he had been trying not to say. I need to tell you something, he said. Tell me about why I accepted Pemmer's terms. You told me. The trust. The inheritance. The deadline, that's the practical reason. He stopped. The other reason is, I had decided that a marriage built on a contract was the appropriate version of marriage for someone like me. Because a contract has edges. It has defined terms. It doesn't ask for things I don't know how to give. Eleanor looked at him steadily. And I thought, he continued, that if I accepted a trap in the paperwork, if I let Pemmer have that leverage, it was because I didn't believe I deserved the kind of marriage that needed protecting. The fire. The room. The quiet between 2 people after something real has been said. You thought you deserved to be trapped, Eleanor said. I thought it didn't matter either way. Those are different things. Yes, he said. I know. She stood up from the desk, crossed to the window, looked out at the dark grounds. Your father taught you that, she said. Silence, Mrs. Aldwych told me, she said. About what he said. The morning after your mother died, more silence. Different quality. She shouldn't have. She should have, Eleanor said, turning back. Someone should have told someone a very long time ago. He said nothing. It was wrong, she said. What he told you. It was wrong and it was cruel, and it has been running your life for 20 years and you've been calling it wisdom, Eleanor. I'm not asking you to argue with me. I'm just telling you that I know. And that I think you've known it was wrong for a long time too. And that knowing it alone in a house this size has probably been. She stopped. Difficult, she said. Simply the fire shifted. Light moved across the room. Calum stood behind his desk and looked at her. And in his expression, for the first time since she had walked into that ballroom, there was nothing managed, nothing controlled. Just the face of a man who had been seen by another person and didn't entirely know what to do with it. Tuesday, he said finally. Tuesday, she agreed. She picked up her notebook, checked her list. I'll write to Barwick tonight. We need his sworn statement before the council convenes. I'll have my own solicitor contact him directly. Good. She headed for the door. Eleanor, she stopped. Thank you, he said. For the letters. For all of it, she turned just slightly. We're going to win on Tuesday, she said. I know. And after that, she said, I'd like to have a conversation about what comes next. Not the contract. The other part. He looked at her. The other part, the part where we figure out what this actually is, she said. When we're not busy fighting someone else, she left. He stood in the empty study for a long time. The fire, the papers, the night pressing against the windows. He had a wife who had assembled a defense in 3 days, without asking for his help, who had found the rot in his own house in 2 weeks, who had sat across from him and said someone should have told someone a very long time ago, with the calm certainty of a woman who had no interest in leaving. He thought about the blanket. 4 a.m. The fire burned low. Her breathing, even and unguarded, in the chair beside the fire. I felt you there, she had said. He had denied it. She had let him deny it. And then she had shown up every morning after that. 2 cups of tea, no comment, no demand. Just present. He sat down, picked up his pen, wrote the letter to Barwick himself. On the evening before the council met, Aldous Pemmer arrived at Harrow Hall, not invited, not expected. His carriage in the drive at 7 p.m, with the particular confidence of a man who had decided the timing would not be questioned. Eleanor received him in the entrance hall. Not the drawing room, the entrance hall. Because she had decided that the distance from the front door to the exit should be very short. He was 60 years old, silver-haired. The kind of handsome that had been better 20 years ago and knew it. He moved through the hall with the ease of a man who had spent a lifetime entering rooms he technically did not own and behaving as though he did. Duchess Harrow, he said, with a warmth entirely constructed. How lovely. I hoped we might have a private conversation. We might, she said. Though I doubt you'll find it as private as you're hoping. He smiled, unaffected. I simply want to offer you an opportunity, before tomorrow, to consider what's best for everyone. Go on. The council will hear testimony tomorrow that places your character and conduct in a difficult position. I believe, and I say this with genuine goodwill. Genuine goodwill, she thought. Right. That there is a simpler resolution. An annulment can be arranged quietly, the settlements retained. Your family's debt remains cleared, and everyone moves forward without the unpleasantness of a formal inquiry. She looked at him. He met her gaze with the practiced calm of a man who had made this kind of offer many times and had a very high success rate. And the 4th page of the contract, Eleanor said, a flicker. Very small, very briefly. I'm not sure what. The clause about the debt being returned if the marriage dissolves due to my misconduct. The page added after my father signed. In your handwriting, the warmth left his face. Not all at once, like someone turning a dial slowly in the wrong direction. That is a serious allegation, he said. I have the original signature pages. I have a statement from the solicitor who drafted them. I have a former counsel who worked in your employ for 11 years and retained copies of everything he produced, including documents he was asked to backdate. She paused. Tomorrow is going to be a much longer day than you planned for. Pemmer was very still. You should understand, he said, the warmth entirely gone, that I have been managing the affairs of this estate and this family for 15 years. I know where everything is. I know what everything costs. And I know how to make things very difficult for people who what? Caleb said from the staircase. He had come down quietly. Standing at the bottom of the stairs with the controlled neutrality that Eleanor had learned, by now, was the face he wore when he was most angry. Pemmer turned. The two men looked at each other. 15 years of management and patience, and small, deliberate damages on one side. A man who had finally understood what had been happening in his own house on the other. You should go, Caleb said. Not loudly. He never needed to be loud. Caleb. We'll see you at the council tomorrow, Eleanor said. With our documentation. Pemmer looked at her, then at Caleb. Then he left. His carriage rolled down the drive faster than it had arrived. The sound of it fading until there was only the night and the old house and two people standing in the entrance hall. How much did you hear? Eleanor asked. Enough, are you all right? He looked at the door where Pemmer had been. He's been in this house for 15 years, he said quietly. Invited. Trusted. I showed him every weakness because I thought he was helping me manage them. He was, she said, managing them in the direction he wanted them to go. I should have seen it. He was very careful. And he had a long time to practice. They stood together in the entrance hall of Harrow Hall, the house settling around them, and something between them, not yet named, not yet spoken, that had been building in breakfast rooms and libraries and late-night writing desks, that had started the moment a woman walked into a ballroom in borrowed silk and refused to hesitate, something that, by tomorrow, would need a name. Tuesday arrived the way important days always did, quickly. Without announcement, the same gray morning light through the same windows, the same sound of the house waking up around her, the same smell of wood smoke from the kitchen fires. Ordinary. All of it ordinary, except it wasn't. Eleanor was already dressed when her lady's maid arrived. Already at the writing desk, the notebook open. The 3 sealed responses from Ivor and Mrs. Aldwych and Lady Constance arranged in a neat row. Barwick's sworn statement, delivered by Caleb's solicitor the previous evening, 8 pages, signed, witnessed, devastating in its specificity. In a separate leather folder, she read through everything once more. Not because she needed to. Because she needed to know she hadn't missed anything. She hadn't. She closed the notebook, folded her hands, looked out the window at the grounds of Harrow Hall in the early morning. The trees, the stone walls, the path to the east garden where she had walked every morning for 3 weeks, with her measuring string and her notebook, her house. Now, she hadn't thought of it that way until this moment. Hadn't let herself. But sitting here in the early gray light with everything she had built in 3 weeks stacked on the desk beside her, she felt it. the weight and the warmth of a place that had decided to accept her. She picked up her leather folder, went downstairs. Calum was in the entrance hall, already dressed, formal coat. The black that made him look like architecture. His expression, the controlled neutral that she had learned by now, was the face he wore when he was most determined to appear as though he felt nothing. Which meant he felt quite a lot. "Ready?" he said. "Yes, Mrs. Aldwych has the documents on the table in the formal library, organized by date. Ivor arrives at 9. "I know, Lady Constance is already here," Mrs. Aldwych said, appearing from the corridor with the serenity of someone who had been managing difficult mornings for 20 years and found this one, if she was honest, considerably more interesting than most. Her carriage arrived at 7:30. "She is currently in the blue drawing room having tea and telling my second housemaid that the silver needs repolishing, which it does." "A beat, she came early," Eleanor said. "She came the night before," Mrs. Aldwych said. "Stayed at the inn in the village," she said, and I am quoting directly, "I wanted to see the house before I defended it." Eleanor stared at her, then laughed, not politely. Actually laughed, short, surprised, the real kind. And Calum, standing 3 feet away in his architectural black coat, made a sound that was, without question, the beginning of a laugh he had suppressed at the last possible moment. Mrs. Aldwych pretended not to notice. "I'll bring more tea to the library," she said, and went. The formal library of Harrow Hall had not been used for anything serious in a generation. It was a beautiful room. High ceilings, dark shelves, the kind of windows that made even gray morning light look intentional. And this morning it held 6 people, a great deal of documentation, and the specific quality of tension that came from a fight that had been building for weeks and was finally, about to happen in the open. Lord Pemberton arrived first, white-haired, precise. The kind of man who had served on a dozen councils and approached each one with the same efficient dispassion. Lord Ashby arrived second, 38, the youngest of the 3 council members. He had the expression of a man who had not entirely understood what he was walking into when he agreed to serve on this council, and was now beginning to understand it quite clearly. Lord Carew came last. Older, moved slowly but observed quickly. The eyes of someone who had watched a great many situations unfold and had developed the particular wisdom of a man who waited to see what was actually happening before deciding what he thought about it. Then Cordelia Strayle, in ivory, which Eleanor noted with the specific appreciation of a woman who recognized a calculated choice when she saw one. Ivory, the color of brides, of beginnings. Of the thing Cordelia believed was rightfully hers, her solicitor came in behind her. Good. Practiced. Moving with the efficiency of someone who had reviewed his materials the night before and felt confident in them. Then Pemmer. He sat down without looking at Eleanor, without looking at Calum, looking at the council members with the warm, familiar manner of a man who had been in rooms with these people for 15 years, who had eaten at their tables, who had used that access, carefully, deliberately, to ensure that when this day came, he would not be walking into a room of strangers. He was not walking into a room of strangers. Eleanor had known that. She had prepared for it anyway. Ivor arrived at 9, slightly windswept. Not because he had rushed, because Ivor Dunn moved through the world at a pace that consistently suggested he had just come from somewhere more interesting. He took one look at the room, at Cordelia, at Pemmer, at the council members, at Eleanor and Calum standing together near the window. "Good," he said cheerfully to no one in particular. "Everyone's here." And then Lady Constance Vere came in, 70 years old, dressed in dark gray with the particular posture of a woman who had decided, sometime in her late 40s, that she was done accommodating other people's discomfort. She walked with a cane but used it like punctuation rather than support. She surveyed the room in approximately 4 seconds and conveyed, without a single word, her comprehensive assessment of everyone in it. She sat down next to Eleanor, looked at Cordelia, looked at Pemmer, said to Eleanor and no one else, in a voice that was not intended to carry but did, "Good. I've been waiting for this." The proceedings began. Cordelia's solicitor was good, efficient, unhurried. He built his case from the forged letter and a purchased witness statement, with the quiet confidence of a man who believed his materials were solid. He laid out the timeline. Eleanor's alleged acquaintance with Lord Ivor Dunn prior to the marriage. The letter produced and circulated to each council member. A statement from a seamstress in Bath named Mrs. Holt, confirming she had made garments for Eleanor during a period when she was, allegedly, in Lord Ivor's regular company. He spoke for 22 minutes. When he finished, Lord Pemberton looked to Calum. "Your Grace." "The council requires your response." Calum stood. And here was the thing about Calum Harrow that Eleanor had spent 3 weeks learning. He did not perform. He did not project. He simply existed in a room with the full unhurried authority of a man who understood, at a molecular level, that he did not need to be louder than anyone else to be heard. "The letter attributed to Lord Dunn is a forgery," he said. "Lord Dunn is present and prepared to say so under any conditions the council requires." Ivor raised one hand with the relaxed ease of a man who had been looking forward to this part. "Absolute forgery," he said. "I have never written to Lady Harrow in my life. I'll swear to it on any document you'd like to produce. Also, whoever forged this has never actually read anything I've written. The vocabulary is entirely too measured." Lord Ashby appeared to suppress a smile. Cordelia's solicitor did not. "The statement from Mrs. Holt," Calum continued, "claims the Duchess was in Bath in Lord Dunn's company during a specific 3-week period 2 years ago." He paused. "Lady Constance Vere was present in Bath during that same period. She spent every morning of those 3 weeks in the Duchess's company." Lord Pemberton looked at Lady Constance. She did not need an invitation. She spoke for 14 minutes. In a tone that suggested she had been personally insulted by the existence of Mrs. Holt's statement and had spent the previous 24 hours deciding exactly how to express that insult in a manner appropriate to a formal proceeding. She remembered every morning. She provided dates, times, specific conversations. The particular blend of tea Eleanor's mother had requested. The fact that on the morning of the 14th day Eleanor had been late because she had stayed to help a tenant's child who had fallen near the carriage house. She provided all of this with the precision of a woman who did not forget things and found, in this situation, the not forgetting to be genuinely satisfying. When she finished, 2 of the 3 council members were looking at Cordelia's solicitor with the expression of men who had agreed to attend something they no longer wished to be attending. Lord Carew was looking at Pemmer, not accusatorially, just looking, watching, the old eyes that had seen many situations unfold doing what they did. "There is a final matter," Eleanor said. She had not sat down. She had been standing near the window for the entire proceeding. Still, unhurried, waiting for exactly this moment. All heads turned. She opened the leather folder. "The original contract between my father and the Duke includes a 4th page," she said. "A clause stipulating that if this marriage dissolves within 12 months due to what is described as the moral misconduct of the wife, the full sum paid to clear my family's debts becomes immediately due and payable with interest." Lord Pemberton frowned. "I was not provided with a copy of—" "No," Eleanor said. "You weren't, because this page was not part of the original contract. It was added after my father signed the first 3 pages, in a different hand." She set copies in front of each council member. "I retained an independent solicitor to examine the original documents. The ink on page 4 is inconsistent with the ink on pages 1 through 3, in both composition and aging. The signature pressure differs from my father's signature on the preceding pages, is in ways consistent with a man signing an addendum he had not carefully reviewed." She set the second document on the table. "I also obtained a sworn statement from Mr. Harold Barwick, who served as personal counsel to Mr. Aldous Pemmer for 11 years. Mr. Barwick drafted the 4th page at Mr. Pemmer's direct instruction. He has provided a record of the date of drafting, which postdates my father's original signature by 11 days. And he has provided his own sworn testimony that he was instructed to present this page as part of the original contract." The room was very quiet, the particular quiet of people who have just understood something they cannot ununderstand. Lord Carew was still looking at Pemmer. Pemmer was looking at the table. "This means," Eleanor said, and her voice was completely even, "that the clause designed to financially destroy my family in the event that I was pushed out of this marriage, a clause that was the foundation of the strategy currently before this council, is fraudulent. It has no legal standing, and the petition built around it has no foundation." She closed the leather folder. "That is all," she said. The council deliberated for 23 minutes. Eleanor knew the exact duration because she counted. She stood in the corridor outside the library with Calum and Ivor and Mrs. Aldwych and Lady Constance, and she counted the minutes with the methodical calm of a woman who had run out of useful things to do and had decided that counting was better than the alternative. Ivor was eating a biscuit. "Where did you get that?" Eleanor asked. "Mrs. Aldwych," he said. She looked at Mrs. Aldwych. It seemed like a long wait. Mrs. Aldwych said without apology. Lady Constance examined the hallway with the critical attention of someone assessing property. "The east corridor wants repainting," she said. "I know," Eleanor said. "The frames on those windows are being replaced next week." Lady Constance looked at her. You've been here 3 weeks. I work quickly." Something shifted in the old woman's expression. Not a smile, something better. The look of someone who has formed an opinion and found, upon examination, that it is entirely correct. "Good," she said. Simply, Calum stood slightly apart from the group. Not because he had withdrawn, but because standing apart was still, after 34 years, the default. Eleanor looked at him from her position near the wall. He was looking at the library door, not anxiously, with the focused stillness of a man who had decided he was not going to let himself care about the outcome and was failing at it rather thoroughly. She moved to stand beside him, not close enough to be remarkable, just beside him, in the way she had started to occupy the same space he occupied, quietly, without announcement, the way you settle into something that has decided to become familiar. He looked at her. "We're going to win," she said. "You said that already." "I'm saying it again." He looked back at the door. "You're very certain of things. Someone has to be a beat. How are you not?" He stopped, frightened. "I was going to say anxious." "I'm terrified," she said evenly. "I've been terrified since I read the 4th page. I just find it more useful to keep moving than to stop and feel it." He was quiet. "Where did you learn that?" he asked. "Same place you did," she said. "A house that was falling apart while everyone pretended it wasn't." He looked at her, and in his expression, the controlled neutral, the managed stillness, there was something new. Sense. Not the corner of the mouth almost thing. Something quieter, deeper, recognition, the look of a man who has heard himself described, for the first time, by someone who was not trying to criticize him. Just naming something. The way you name a thing so it stops having power over you. The library door opened. Lord Pemberton came out, looked at them both, looked at his papers. "The petition is dismissed," he said. In full, Cordelia left without speaking to anyone. Her carriage was down the drive and through the gates before Eleanor had finished shaking Lord Carew's hand. She went quickly, not running. The specific speed of a dignified exit that had been rehearsed as a contingency and was now, disappointingly, required. Eleanor watched it from the library window. She felt not triumph, not relief, exactly. Something steadier than both. The specific satisfaction of having built a thing carefully enough that it held. Pemmer did not leave immediately. He sat in his chair for a moment after the council members filed out, looking at the table, at the distance between where he had been this morning and where he was now. Lord Carew paused beside him on his way out. Did not say anything. Just paused, looked at him with the old eyes that had seen a great many things, and then moved on, which was, somehow, worse than anything that could have been said. Pemmer stood, walked to the door, stopped, turned, looked at Calum. Calum looked back. Level. Unhurried. 15 years, Pemmer said. "Yes," Calum said. "I managed everything." "You managed everything in the direction you wanted it to go." Pemmer's mouth tightened. "Your father, my father," Calum said, "is not a reason. He is not an excuse. And he is not relevant to what you did." A long moment. "You'll hear from my lawyers," Calum said. "About Barwick's statement, about the contract, about the estate manager." Pemmer looked at him for one more moment, then left. The carriage rolled down the drive, and when the sound of it faded, there was only the library and the morning light, and the quiet that came after a storm had passed, and the world was still deciding whether it was truly over. Ivor shook Calum's hand, said something quiet that made Calum's expression do something complicated, something Eleanor didn't try to read. Some things between old friends were not for observation. Then Ivor turned to her. "For what it's worth," he said, "and I say this as someone who has watched Calum Harrow navigate the world for 15 years. You are the best thing that has happened to this house in a very long time. Also," he said, "the North Bridge is genuinely a structural hazard." "I nearly lost a horse." "I know," she said. "It's being repaired in the spring," he grinned, shook her hand, winked at Calum. Left with the energetic ease of a man who had thoroughly enjoyed his Tuesday morning and was already looking forward to telling the story. Lady Constance said the ceremony was adequate, said the biscuits were acceptable, told Eleanor she had excellent spine and expected to see her in Somerset before Christmas. Then she left in her ancient carriage with the energy of a woman who had been prepared for a much longer battle and was both satisfied with the outcome and slightly disappointed it hadn't required more. Mrs. Aldwych stood in the doorway of the library, not crying, not visibly, not in any way she would ever acknowledge, but the particular brightness in her eyes and the very straight set of her shoulders, and the way she looked at the two people standing in the middle of the room, and then looked away quickly. All of it was perfectly legible to anyone who had been paying attention, which Eleanor had been, and then they were alone, just the two of them. In the library that Duke Harrow had spent 34 years treating as a room for work and not much else. With the morning light coming through the tall windows and falling across the table that had, 20 minutes ago, held the documents that ended a 15-year campaign against everything this house was supposed to be. Kylam crossed to the window. Eleanor sat on the edge of the table. The silence was different now. Not the managed silence of two people performing composure. Not the careful silence of a negotiation. This was the silence after. The kind that existed when the thing you had been bracing against was finally, actually completely over. "It's done," Eleanor said. "It's done. Barwick's testimony will need to the formal courts. The estate manager will need to be replaced. There are probably other, Eleanor." She stopped. He turned from the window and looked at her the way he had been looking at her since that morning in the entrance hall. Not the winter water stillness. Not the controlled neutral. Something that had given up on being controlled a few days ago and was still in the process of adjusting to that. "I know," he said. "There's more work. There's always more work." He paused. "I need to say something first." She waited. "I owe you an apology." "Calum, let me finish. Not harsh, just direct. The way he was direct when it cost him something. The 4th page. Signing it without telling you. I told myself it was practical, that I had time to fix it. That you didn't need to know something that might resolve itself." He moved from the window, stopped in the middle of the room. "The truth is, I signed it because I didn't believe this marriage needed protecting. Because I had decided, before I met you, before I knew anything about you, that whatever happened here didn't matter enough to fight for." Eleanor looked at him steadily. "I was wrong," he said. "That's all. I was wrong, and you deserved better than a husband who walked you into a trap because he had given up on the possibility of anything worth protecting. The morning light. The room. The fire that Mrs. Aldwych had lit before the proceedings, and that was still burning, low and steady, in the grate. That's the most honest thing you've said to me since our wedding night," Eleanor said. "I know. It might be the most honest thing you've said to anyone." He considered this. "Possibly," he said. She looked at him for a moment. "Accepted," she said. He blinked the apology, she said. "Accepted. We're done with it." "That's—" "Don't argue with an acceptance," she said. "It's unbecoming." Something moved across his face. That almost thing. The corner of his mouth. The briefest involuntary response that she had been collecting since the ballroom. And that were, she had decided, worth considerably more than the full smiles other people produced on demand. "After Tuesday." She said. He looked at her. "You said, after Tuesday, you wanted to start again." "I did. It's after Tuesday." The room was very quiet. "Yes," he said. "It is." He crossed to the table, stopped, close enough that she was aware of the warmth of him. The way he occupied space, carefully, deliberately, like someone who had spent a long time making sure he didn't take up too much room. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "Do what?" "Any of it." He stopped, started again. "I don't know how to be in a house with someone, how to include someone, how to let someone see you." "Yes, I know," she said. "You've been doing it anyway." He looked at her. "The fire at 4 in the morning," she said. "The 2 cups. Coming back early from the eastern boundary. Following me to the bridge path every morning for 2 weeks, and pretending you happened to be going the same direction. A beat. You noticed." "Of course I noticed. You never said anything." "I was waiting for you to be ready to say it first." He stood there. A man of 34 years, the Duke of Harrow, holder of one of the oldest titles in England, who had spent the better part of his life perfecting the appearance of not needing anything. Standing in his own library looking at his wife with an expression that was, against all his careful construction, entirely unguarded. and he reached out. Slowly, deliberately, took her hand. Not with the clinical ceremony of a ring being placed on a finger, not with the managed distance of two people navigating a contract. His thumb moved across her knuckles, careful, unhurried, the same quiet motion she had felt in the dark hour before dawn, as if the gesture itself was an answer to a question he hadn't known how to ask directly. "I want a real marriage," he said. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just said it. The way you say something when you have been carrying it for long enough that the weight of keeping it in has finally exceeded the weight of letting it out. Not the arrangement. Not the contract. His eyes on hers. "I want you to choose to stay here because you want to. Not because your family needs protection. Not because there's no better option. Because you want to." Eleanor looked at him, at this man who had taken 34 years to say those words. "I already have," she said. He blinked. "I chose it," she said. "About 3 weeks ago. I just wasn't sure you were there yet." The morning light fell across the table between them. He took one step forward, then another. And then his hands were on her face, careful, like something he was afraid of breaking, which was completely wrong because she was the least breakable person he had ever encountered, and she was looking up at him. And he kissed her. Not dramatically. Not like a moment designed to be witnessed. Like a man who had finally stopped making a logical argument against something that was going to happen anyway, and had simply stopped arguing. Like a question answered. Like two people who had been in the same room for 3 weeks, learning each other's silences, and had finally run out of reasons to maintain the distance. The fire burned low. The light shifted through the library windows. And outside, in the corridor, Mrs. Aldwych stood with a tea tray she had brought for a reason she was now revising, looked through the gap in the door, and then walked away with a smile she would not tell anyone about for several weeks. The weeks that followed did not make things simple. Real things rarely did. There was the matter of Pemmer's legal exposure, which Calum's solicitors handled with a thoroughness that suggested they had been waiting for this particular instruction for some time. There was the estate manager's replacement, the pending repairs, the North Bridge, the East Corridor windows, the 3 years of maintenance requests that had been sitting in someone's filed for review pile. There was the matter of Eleanor's father, who sent a letter, carefully worded, expressing relief at the council's decision, not apologizing for the 4th page. She was not sure he had fully understood what he had signed, not apologizing for the bargain he had made, but present. Reaching, in his limited way, Eleanor wrote back. Brief, cordial. The tone of a woman who had decided that some relationships could be maintained at a careful distance and that this was not failure but realism. She would not pretend. She would not perform forgiveness she hadn't yet found her way to. But she would not close the door entirely. Some things took longer than 3 weeks. There was the matter of Calum. That was its own ongoing education. He was, she discovered, in the weeks after Tuesday, not easy to know. He had been right about that from the beginning. He forgot to say things. Not from cruelty. From a life assuming that the things he felt were not required to be spoken. She had to ask. Directly, often, "What are you thinking?" "Nothing." "That's not true." A pause. "I'm thinking about the Northeast tenant farm." The roof situation before that longer pause. "I'm thinking about." He stopped. Tried again. "I'm thinking that you look well this morning. In that particular way that I..." Another stop. "I don't have the words. You're doing fine," she said. "I'm not." "The fact that you're trying is enough. That seems like a low bar." "It's not," she said. You'd be surprised. He was not, she discovered. Someone who changed. Not fundamentally. He would always be the man who stood at windows when he was thinking, who lit his own fire before 4, who managed his expression so carefully that the real version only appeared in unguarded seconds, who said the most important things so quietly you could miss them if you weren't paying attention. But he was also, and this was the thing she had suspected from the beginning and had spent 3 weeks confirming, someone capable of learning, not performing. Genuinely learning, the 2 cups of tea became reliable. The morning newspapers became shared. The evenings in the library became something she looked forward to with a warmth she had stopped pretending not to feel. He asked her opinion. Not always, not easily, but he asked. About the tenant repairs, about the household schedule, about whether the North Bridge should be stone, or whether she thought the reinforced timber technique was more practical. She had opinions about all of it. He listened, all of them. The proposal, the real one, was nothing like she would have written for him. It was October. The grounds were doing what October grounds do, turning, slowly, into the version of themselves that existed in paintings. The trees, the stone walls dark with morning damp. The whole estate settling into the specific beauty of something old enough to have survived many autumns and intended to survive many more. Eleanor had gone out to the east garden, not because it was warm. It wasn't warm. The autumn air had a sharpness she had decided she liked. It was honest, the way cold air was always more honest about what it was. She was looking at the rose wall. The question of the roses had been pending for 2 weeks, whether to cut them back before the winter or whether, as she believed, they needed one more season before pruning. Mrs. Aldwych agreed with Eleanor. The head groundsman agreed with Calum. This had produced 4 separate conversations and no resolution. She was examining the canes, making notes. Being right about it, she did not hear him come out, but she heard the door close behind him, turned. He was standing on the garden path without his coat, which was not like him. He was always precise about such things. The coat, the gloves, the complete management of his presentation. No coat in October. This is unusual, she thought. You came out without. I saw you through the window, he said, and I didn't want to take the time. She looked at him. The roses, he said, should be cut back. They shouldn't. The head groundsman. The head groundsman is wrong, Eleanor, Calum. She looked at the roses. Look at the new growth on the lower canes. That's a plant that has been managed too heavily for too long. It needs a year without interference. A year to do what it needs to do without someone deciding they know better than it does. He looked at the roses. He looked at her. And then he stopped, mid-sentence, mid-argument, just stopped, the way you stop when something shifts, when the ground underneath changes. When you have been saying one thing and have suddenly, clearly, completely understood that you are not actually talking about what you thought you were talking about. She was standing in the autumn garden with her notebook in one hand and her measuring string in the other and dried leaf fragments on her sleeve, looking back at him with the patient, steady expression of a woman who had been waiting for exactly this. I want a real marriage, he said. Not planned, not rehearsed, just said. Not the arrangement, not the contract, not the version I signed because I had decided I didn't deserve better. He crossed the path to where she was standing. 2 steps. 3. I want you to choose to be here. Every day. Because you want to. Because He stopped, took a breath because I have been waiting at this window for 34 years, and I didn't know it until 3 weeks ago. Eleanor stood in the east garden of Harrow Hall in the cold October air. She had been prepared for many things in her life, had been practical about difficult things, had decided, early and often, not to be undone by circumstance she couldn't control. She had not been prepared for this, not for the way it felt to be chosen, clearly, directly, without condition, by a man who had spent 34 years deciding that choosing was too dangerous. I already chose, she said. 3 weeks ago. I know, he said. I need you to know I'm choosing back. The first drop of rain landed on the notebook in her hand. Then another. She didn't move. The roses, she said. The roses can wait, he said. They can, she agreed. And when he kissed her this time, in the east garden in the October rain, no witnesses except the roses that were absolutely being kept for another season. It was not the careful thing from the library. It was the other kind. The kind that happened when 2 people had stopped performing and started simply being in the same place at the same time. The kind that felt like something that had been building for 3 weeks and had finally, in a garden argument about rose canes, decided it was done being patient. The second wedding took place on a Saturday in early December, the small chapel on the Harrow estate. Stone, old. The kind of place that had witnessed 300 years of history and had the quality of a room that had been present for things that mattered and knew the difference. It had not been used for anything real in 40 years. It was used for something real now. Mrs. Aldwych sat in the front row and did not cry where anyone could see her. This required considerable effort. Lord Iver arrived 20 minutes early, said the chapel was extremely atmospheric, and asked whether there were any biscuits. There were not. He found this genuinely disappointing. Lady Constance Vere sat in the second row in dark blue and examined the stonework with the critical attention of someone who was going to have opinions about the restoration quality. The east window needs repointing, she said to no one. I know, Eleanor said, passing her on the way to the door. Spring, Lady Constance looked at her, then, with the particular grace of a woman who had very high standards and was, this once, prepared to acknowledge they had been met. Good, she said. Eleanor's mother sat near the back, held Eleanor's hand before the doors opened and said nothing at all. Not because she had nothing to say. Because she understood, with the precision that mothers occasionally managed, that this was a moment when everything important had already been said, and the only thing left was to be present for it. Eleanor looked at her mother's face, at the hands that had fastened her clasp the night of the Aldermere ball. Trembling then. Still now, thank you, Eleanor said. For packing the white cotton nightgown, her mother blinked. It was completely unsuitable, Eleanor said. I know, her mother said. I panicked, and Eleanor laughed, briefly, quietly, in the cold stone entrance of a 200-year-old chapel, and then straightened her shoulders and went to the doors. Outside, lining the path from the chapel to the waiting carriage, were the tenants and staff of the Harrow estate. 300 people, give or take, not because they had been required to come, not because a notice had been sent, because word had traveled the way. Word traveled in places where people had lived alongside each other long enough to develop a common language, through Mrs. Aldwick to the head groundsman, through the head groundsman to the stable master, through the stable master to the carpenter's wife, through the carpenter's wife to everyone. She's still here. And today she's choosing to stay. The carpenter who had been waiting 3 years for the North Bridge repair. The housekeeper's niece hired last month on Eleanor's recommendation. The tenant farmer's wife who had started calling her Your Grace in the tone of someone who meant it. Not as a title, but as a recognition. They stood in the cold December air and waited. And when the chapel doors opened and Eleanor Marsh, Eleanor Harrow, Duchess of Harrow, walked out with her hand on her husband's arm and her chin at the angle she had carried it since she walked into a ballroom in borrowed silk and refused to hesitate, they stayed, just stayed, watching. The quiet, collective warmth of people witnessing something they had privately hoped for and had not been entirely certain they would get to see. Eleanor walked through them slowly. Looking at the faces she had spent 3 months learning, the names she had asked for and remembered, the histories she had listened to, she felt Callum's arm under her hand, felt the way he walked beside her. Not ahead, not behind, beside, with the careful attention of a man who was still learning what it meant to be in the same place as someone else, and had decided definitively to keep learning. She looked up at him. He looked down at her, and in that look, between the two of them, above the heads of 300 people standing in the December cold, there was something that did not need a name because it already had one. The everyone watching knew what it was. In the breakfast room of Harrow Hall. Months later, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, 2 cups of tea sat on the table, one strong. No sugar, one with 2 sugars. A concession Callum had made quietly around week 4, without announcement, which Eleanor had noted and not commented on. Because some things were better observed than acknowledged. Because some things you let be what they were without requiring them to be spoken. He was reading the papers. She was reviewing the tenant accounts. The fire was lit. The room smelled of bread from the morning baking. The North Bridge, he said, without looking up. Opens Thursday, she said. The carpenter is pleased? The carpenter wept slightly when I told him. A pause. That seems like a reasonable response, Callum said. I thought so. He turned a page. She made a note in the account book. Outside, the winter light moved across the grounds of Harrow Hall. The rose wall in the east garden, unpruned, doing what it needed to do. The stone walls, solid and old, holding everything inside them the way old things held what mattered. Not by force, but by permanence. By simply continuing to stand. Eleanor, he said. She looked up. He was still reading, still looking at his papers. But his hand had moved across the table. Not dramatically, not with announcement. Just moved, until it rested beside hers. She looked at it, then put her hand over his. They sat like that for a long time, reading. In the morning light. In the quiet house that had stopped being empty, because some love stories were not about the moment 2 people found each other. They were about the morning after. And the morning after that, and every ordinary morning that 2 people chose, again and again and again, to stay.